Hello, good evening, and welcome to Late Online from the Natural History Museum. I'm Khalil Thirlaway. This month, we've got something a little bit different for you. A documentary filmed 50 years in the future, in the year 2071, and beamed back to us here in 2021. We'll be looking at some of the big environmental challenges we're facing right now, how we might respond to them, and what the consequences could be. We do love hearing from you as well, and there'll be a chance for you to put your questions and comments to our guests at the end of the show. But in the meantime, do feel free to get involved in the chat section if there's anything that sparks your imagination. We'll be posting a couple of discussion prompts in the chat at various points during the show as well. If you do enjoy the show, please consider making a donation if you can, using the donate button if you're on YouTube, or at nhm.ac.uk/donate. There should be a link coming up in the chat. So, without further ado, let's dive into Hindsight 2021, the documentary from the future. Hello, and welcome to Hindsight 2021. We're going to take a look back at one of the most pivotal periods in humankind's relationship with our planet. What was going on? How did we handle it? And how did we get to where we are now? Joining me to shed some light on the past are three colleagues. First up, dialing in especially from his aquatic research facility, we have Ken Johnson. Hi, Ken. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, how you doing? Good to be here.
Have you just come in from a sampling trip or something?
Just out swimming around a bit, yeah.
Lovely. We are also joined by Sara Motaghian, all the way from the former Lunar Gateway. So you'll have to apologize for a little bit of a delay on this communication, potentially.
Can you hear me down on Earth?
It looks like we do have the quantum entangled delay-free communication up and running. It's a bit touch and go with that one. Thank you, Sara. Great to have you here. And finally, Gustavo Burin joins us from the Botanical Reserve, located in an undisclosed location in the temperate zone. Welcome to the show, Gustavo.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Happy to be here.
So let's set the scene for our audience. What was the situation like on Earth in 2021? Let's start with something that the people of 2021 would be quite familiar with, the terrestrial sphere. Gustavo, what was going on the land?
Oh, we had so many issues to worry about, like deforestation, consequent habitat loss that led to the loss of key species, the emergence of new diseases, and this is just to name a few.
Well, remember those waves of pandemics that we had. There was the respiratory one, and then the other. That was just the first of like 6.
Yeah.
Tell me about it.
And Ken, what about our relationship with the water? How were we treating that?
Well, the ocean was warming. I mean, increasing greenhouse gas emissions had been warming the oceans for the past 20 or 30 years at least, and things were starting to respond in 2021. Coral bleaching, which is caused when warm waters interrupts the ecology of coral reef ecosystems, was becoming very, very common, almost normal. And there was lots of pollution in the water. There was local impacts. The fisheries were all suffering. And, the oceans were in a pretty bad state in 2021.
So, if our little globe wasn't doing too well, what about beyond it? Because this was relatively early on in our relationship with the world beyond ours. Sara?
So, yeah, the 2020s were like the first time that we looked back at space with a kind of eye to put humans back out there since the 1960s, when we first went to the moon, a crazy long time ago now. And it was quite an exciting time. It was generally pretty positive. We had the start of the Lunar Gateway. We had the first in situ resource utilization on Mars. We did have like quite a lot of those huge burning masses falling back towards the Earth from bad launches, but it was generally pretty good.
And most of those missed major habitation centers. So,
most of them, yeah, like it was a pretty good ratio at the time.
Well, the things that were deemed acceptable back then, there were different times.
We live and we learn.
Exactly. And one of the great tragedies of the 2020s was the fact that just as efforts to curb emissions and rebalance our relationship with the planet were gaining momentum, a new player entered the arena: cryptocurrency. A seemingly innocuous tool for democratizing the concept of money, cryptocurrencies quickly got gobbled up by the existing machinery of capitalism and ran out of control. Sara, what did this mean for the planet?
This was a real turning point. So, I mean, the idea of it's amazing. We decentralize the control, we give power back to individual people, and we don't have anything that's kind of beyond reproach. You can always go back and check them. But we got to the point where one crypto transaction was a month's worth of energy for one household. It spiraled so quickly because people started to see the financial value in it, and they kind of looked past its grassroots point of view. And it kind of kickstarted all of the issues that we face since.
Because, to unpack that slightly, the amount of energy that goes into creating each unit of cryptocurrency increases with each one that is made because of the calculations that computers have to do. And by 2021, the largest cryptocurrency was Bitcoin, and Bitcoin mining was consuming more energy than the entire country of Argentina.
Yeah. I think it was like the 40th largest consuming country for electricity. This concept of crypto mining, which is crazy.
And Ken, what effect did this have on the planet?
Well, because in 2021, most of the energy that was used was not sustainably sourced. It was coming from burning fossil fuels and increasing the greenhouse gas emissions, the CO2 in the atmosphere, which greatly changed climate throughout the 21st century.
And climate change had been having increasingly wide-ranging effects already. But this dramatic uptick in sea level rise was one of the first times people really noticed. Some of our older viewers may remember the city of Amsterdam, once a cultural center of old Europe. The ancient Dutch had accomplished a marvel of engineering by what they called reclaiming large chunks of land from the shallow sea, using canals to create low-lying areas to house farmland and population centers. The flood defenses, however, were not built with Bitcoin in mind. And now Amsterdam lies beneath the waves along with many low-lying cities across the globe from the 2030s. If only there'd been some kind of sign. Did any of you get to visit Amsterdam before it disappeared?
Oh yeah, definitely. Great for bike riding.
Well, not so much anymore.
I can't imagine it now. I've only ever been able to dive the ruins. It's a real shame.
I've never managed to get to the ruins of Amsterdam to dive. It must be a very different experience from seeing it in its prime.
I imagine the stories I hear about the old cities of Atlantis. That's what I think when I see it now.
And Gustavo, are there any places that you miss from before?
Oh yeah, the country I originally come from, Brazil, was known by its beautiful beaches, and now they are all gone. It's just an enormous beach without any particularity. So I miss those days where we can visit different beaches with different landscapes.
Because it wasn't just cities that are affected. Large areas of farmland were inundated with salty seawater, putting huge pressure on our food production systems. Palm oil, a key ingredient in many of our favorite foods, had to be rationed throughout the 2030s. What are some of the things that you missed most during those years? Gustavo?
Oh, I miss crunchy food, Doritos, cereal. I miss them so much, and they all went well with Nutella. So all this food that we're used to have as snacks, they are all gone now, and I miss them so much.
I was reading recently that there used to be a cereal that specific thing was that it was crunchy, and I can't imagine it. I can't imagine what that was like.
Yeah, the idea of having a cereal that isn't just some kind of beige paste was...
Yeah. God.
Happier days. But the food rationing, accompanied with the great crypto crash of 2039, made us realize that our current way of life wasn't working. So, faced with a shortage of snacks and an ever-encroaching ocean, we stopped looking downwards for answers and started looking up. Sara, what can you tell us about the first serious efforts to live beyond our planet?
I mean, initially the plans to move beyond Earth were never supposed to be permanent. We were going to establish bases on the moon and potentially on Mars so we could launch pad out into the rest of the solar system and understand the solar system better. Mars was always an attractive target for people who wanted to live there because it's the closest. It's the easiest for us to get to with our frail physiology. So it became the target mostly out of ease.
But there are some aspects of Mars that make it, shall we say, less than ideal as a home.
Pretty unideal. It's highly irradiated, near inhospitable, 200-degree diurnal temperature ranges, like as many things that you can imagine wrong with it, that for us to live there, it has except being solid.
And there were plans put into place to, shall we say, adapt Mars to be more suitable for human habitations. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, the worse things got on Earth, the less people wanted to solve the problems we were creating, and they started to push for Planet B, and that happened to be Mars. Quite a few ideas were floated, solar mirrors and things like that, to try and heat the surface of Mars and melt its polar caps, hopefully thickening the atmosphere, potentially meaning there'd be liquid water on the surface. And then someone came up with the idea to nuke Mars, to terraform it into a paradise.
And how did that go?
Unsurprisingly, not super well.
I mean, the idea of using the most destructive things we've ever created to create an environment suitable for life seemed poetic, but didn't really work out. With Mars due to become a lush Garden of Eden in no time, a group of the world's richest and most powerful prepared to set sail to our new home. Many of these people had gained their positions of power through things like fossil fuels, rampant consumerism, and cryptocurrency mining, meaning that they were at least partially responsible for exacerbating the environmental problems that they were themselves fleeing. This irony was, of course, lost on them. But thinking back to 2045 and the day of that launch, do you remember how you felt watching that party leave Earth for Mars? Sara, were you wishing you were on board? You've always loved Mars and space.
It was bittersweet for sure. I've always wanted to be on the surface of Mars myself, but I didn't believe in this plan at all, if I'm honest. It seemed too hasty. We didn't have the right technology. The concept is right. You nuke Mars, you melt the water, you enrich the atmosphere, and that helps it warm for us to live there. But we were just too far in our infancy. And the idea that it would be easier to terraform Mars than fix the problems we were facing on Earth was always very alien to me.
And as people who maybe aren't as invested in space and Mars as Sara, Ken, Gustavo, how did that day feel for you?
Well,
I think. Go on, Gustavo.
For me, it was a mixture of hope and fear, because basically all hopes were deposited on the crew. So at the same time, and we were feeling like, oh, there might be a way out of this. We knew that the success chances of this mission were very low. So it was hard to deal with this roller coaster of emotions running from hope to fear.
The stakes were pretty high. Ken?
No, I think we might be better off without them, is what I was thinking. And, we could remake the world without having those types of people being around.
Well, yeah, the ways in which people accumulate power and wealth maybe aren't necessarily the most conducive to a sustainable existence. But I guess we learned that in the following years, because anyone's desire to accompany these pioneers to Mars soon faded when they arrived on planet. What had been predicted to be a lush landscape ripe for habitation turned out to be a blasted wasteland, even more unhospitable than before. Who could have predicted this?
Basically, everybody who worked on this stuff, I won't lie. Like I said, the idea was sound, but our technology wasn't right. And instead of creating a lush paradise, we essentially ushered in a nuclear winter. They detonated the nuclear stockpile in the wrong place, kicked up a lot of dust and ash into the atmosphere, and essentially blocked out the sun. So we had a molten surface from all that imposing energy, but then it slowly cooled and froze.
And without the ability to grow food on Mars, supplies quickly dwindled. The world watched horrified on live stream as these leaders of nations and industry resorted to cannibalism to survive. Well, we say to survive, but the first instance captured on camera actually happened a full 2 Earth days before food ran out. The failure of the mission, coupled with the complete breakdown of humanity witnessed in these colonists, provoked outrage back home. And these are just some of the headlines of the fallout from this incident. One mission scientist, as you can see in that top headline, is channeling Oppenheimer in his regretful confessional, which really, that was a moment that really changed public opinion. If scientists who worked on this, and also the CEO of one of the main companies responsible for the Mars nuclear terraforming, both said that they had made a huge mistake, if the proponents of these things are backing away from them, what did that do to our conversations at home?
I think it drastically changed our attitude towards these moguls and the way we believe the things they say. I had the speech on my wall to remind me to never become a maniacal scientist. And that really helped me to never be a maniacal scientist.
Sure, yeah, definitely not maniacal in any way. Yes. But people realized to a certain extent that all the money that we had been making over the years was somewhat meaningless in a world that was quickly falling apart. If you remember, the phrase "you can't eat money" experienced something of a resurgence, although some people still tried to. Well, what do you remember about this time, Ken?
Well, it was a time when we were coming together finally. You know, people were really communicating with one another and seeing that we can make a difference. We can rebuild the Earth to make it more sustainable and live happily ever after.
I mean, there was a big movement towards that. But I remember within the space science community, Sara, you probably know more about this than I do, but there was talk of Planet C for a little bit.
I mean, yeah, once the kind of like Caesar salad, cash salads like died down a little bit, like immediately people were like, what about Venus? What about Mercury? I'm like, that was even a worse idea than Mars, right? And I think because of the short time that we had left to fix these problems, we didn't have another chance to nuke a planet and ruin it. We had to focus back on Earth. We had to look at what we were doing and how we could change to make our planet survive in a way that allows us to survive too.
So, faced with only one option, humanity finally decided it was time to fix our relationship with Earth. The waters had continued to rise while we grasped at the stars, so by this point, the world map looks somewhat similar to how it does today in 2071. Almost everyone was living near the water, and some were starting to make the first steps towards living on it. And so our relationship with the planet was changing from the old land-focused view to an appreciation of the oceans that was new for many. It wasn't new for everyone, though. Ken, how did these thought processes develop?
Well, people have been living along the coasts for forever, and some communities really know how to do it in a sustainable way. For example, you have to have policies to restrict the amount of fish you catch, have fisheries policies. You have to make sure that things that happen on the land don't contaminate what's going on in the ocean, because the land and the ocean are connected. So you need to stop runoff of pollution and nutrients into the water. Coral reefs are an incredibly important coastal ecosystem, which need to be protected because they house incredible diversity of life, and they provide really important ecosystem services. For example, by growing up as a wall underwater, they protect the coastlines from flooding due to tsunamis or hurricane storm damage. So we learned how to conserve these ecosystems to protect the people living on land. So it isn't only about protecting the life in the ocean. If you take care of the ocean, it also has consequences for what's going on land. So here's tsunamis, flooding. If you have lots of pollution washing into the sea through rivers, you can have these blooms of toxic algae which pollute the water, kill the local marine life, and make it even very unpleasant to just go to the beach because the smell of the ammonia makes it really difficult to be there. So we need to stop putting things in the ocean, and we need to protect what was in the ocean. For example, plastic. In 2021, there was approximately 10 million tons of plastic released into the oceans every year. And now this is stopped.
And I think that's a really important point that you've hit on there. It's that it's the relationship between land and sea. What goes into the water from the land and what comes out of the water towards the land. And you talk about the amount of waste that the plastic waste and the solid waste that we put out into the ocean. But the stuff that we had previously put out there was still out there. Sara, how did we go about remediating some of that?
This is probably one of my favorite things. So we started repurposing some of our now defunct Mars rovers that didn't have a planet to go to into water-faring robots. And honestly, the snorkel's amazing. They've been cleaning up our oceans. They've been trying to pull back some of that pollution that we sent out there. And they're doing a pretty good job. I think actually if you can get back into the old records, there's an old movie from I think the 2010s or something really long ago called WALL-E, and it was just like that, used as inspiration.
Oh, I think I've seen the VR remake of that. I've heard the original's good though.
Oh, yeah, the original's so much better. So much better.
It always is. One of my favorite changes to our lifestyle from our reacquaintance with the sea is how it's changed our relationship with animals. Because, some people still do have terrestrial pets, like this, I believe it's called a dog. But those were much more common in our pre-aquatic days. I would just like to introduce you to my new arrival in the family, though. This is Simba the sea lion. And I hope you'll all agree that he's gorgeous.
Yeah.
He's adorable.
I remember the great day when the Sea Lion King was first broadcasted. It was amazing, even better than the original one.
Right?
Simba looks so much like Simba from it. It's amazing.
I don't know. I think vertebrates are overrated. You should see my pet octopus. She's beautiful.
I mean, they're cool, but they're difficult to keep, right? You have to keep them constantly entertained. And how do you do that with our limited resources now?
Well, you live on the coast.
I heard they're smarter than we are. That's
Maybe
true. I'm limited up here.
Well, maybe we could enlist the assistance of Ken's new pet octopus in solving some of our ongoing issues. Because, we do need to be realistic. We have very much reshaped many aspects of our relationship with our planet, but it's a work in progress. But let's acknowledge some of the benefits. With a more intimate relationship between people, land, and water came some real wins. First of all, we didn't all die, which was tick in the positive column. We got some fun foods back. Because, Ken, you were talking about invertebrates, and there was one invertebrate I think we all saw a bit too much of during the 40s and 50s.
Yeah,
and
the
that
jellyfish
was
boom. Yeah, the jellyfish boom was quite a thing. I mean, the oceans really got full of jellyfish because of the ocean acidification. Anything that's made of shell or bone couldn't survive because the oceans were too acidic. But the jellyfish went crazy.
And they are very versatile. And don't get me wrong,
They're
I love a
bland.
bit of chili jellyfish or something. They do take flavor reasonably well, but there's only so many meals you can eat them for before you start to get a little bit bored. But now,
For me, it was 3. I've been bored for years.
well, now we're back to having our old foods back. Remember tuna and prawns and stuff? Well, they might still be luxuries, but they are becoming more available. And as our ocean ecosystems recover to their resilient and bountiful selves, I think we'll be seeing a lot more of this in normal people's meals rather than just those with access to a little bit more resource.
It's nice
And-
to just see them back in the oceans as well. Like
Right.
when you go visit Amsterdam, you can now see there's actual life around. It's amazing. Such a difference.
Well, I once again, I really do need to check that out because I've seen, I've seen video footage of old, pre-flood Amsterdam, and it seems like a pretty lively place. But there are other aspects of these changes that really benefited us. So when we were talking about Mars terraforming, Sara, there was, the nuking wasn't all bad, was it?
Yeah, so we did have Mars, the martyr. We lost an incredible planet to study, but the way they intended to terraform, they just sent nukes to Mars, and it meant that we depleted nuclear stockpiles across the world, and that was an amazing step towards progress and working together.
Because now that we don't all have the biggest gun in the world pointing at all of our heads at all times. That really helped to engender some sort of solidarity amongst
Who would
humans.
have known that taking away that threat would have helped us cohesively bond so much better?
Well, a combination between not having world-ending nuclear weaponry power and also the shared trauma of nearly reaching the end of our tether as humanity engendered a wave of so-called survivor solidarity that followed this cultural shift and enabled humanity to implement some of the approaches that we had talked about for ages, for decades, but we'd always failed to implement because we were too busy competing with each other. So, for example, some of the technology that got us into this problem. Sara, what about the blockchain?
Oh, so this was amazing. Science has always been like kind of diverse, and it's always been working across multiple countries. But at this point, people really started to work together, and we were able to properly repurpose blockchains that were used in Bitcoin. As part of our energy system, we started being able to rely more heavily on our renewable sources because we had these amazing flexible management systems that created the right ebb and flow of power to make sure we always had enough power to heat our homes, to cook our food.
And I guess it doesn't hurt that there's slightly less energy demand nowadays because we don't have all of that terrestrial infrastructure. And we've also had massive advances in how we capture sustainable energy, the efficiency and the variety of methods. And I think a big pattern that we've seen is that versatility has become more important than a kind of blinkered, disposable specialism. So instead of having each place or each object or each product doing only one thing, and often only a limited number of times, the longevity and versatility has become much more important. Gustavo, what's an example you can think of from the terrestrial sphere?
I think not only talking about objects, but also talking about how we use the land that was left after all the sea level rises. So agroforestry practices, such as which are a way of using the land where trees and shrubs, for example, they are grown around or among crops. So as we have limited space, we could use those practices to both grow food for our sustenance and also try and set up a stage for the nature to recover. So setting stage for the ecological succession and also new trees growing, animals coming back. So I think this is a very socially responsible way of using land.
And this is something that is very new to how we use land now, because traditionally in the pre-return times, we were constantly taking land away from the natural ecosystems and the things that gave us resilience in our biodiversity, and using that for example, large areas of one crop or large areas of farming one animal. And this might seem very alien to us now, but this was just normal back in the day. And Ken, what about you? What sticks out to you from this era?
I think one of the things is when they passed the International Right to Repair Act right after the Mars mission, and all of a sudden you didn't need to buy a new thing every year. I mean, I've had this phone now for 25 years and it works fine, the battery.
Well, I guess it's like Theseus's ship. You replace the battery, you replace the screen, you replace the lens, you replace some of the circuitry, but it's still the same phone.
Exactly. And then the other thing is, sorry?
Just reducing the full amount that we have to keep adding into the system. When I hear about the horrors of the fast fashion industry back in the 2020s and 30s, it's incredible, like the amount of overproduction and waste that went on, and they got away with it for so long.
And that word
now that we have a circular economy, so things there isn't waste anymore, basically, or very, very little. We've been able to find a way to reuse things and repurpose them and upcycle them and recycle them. So there's almost no waste at all now.
And I think that's the real philosophical difference between our thinking now and our thinking back then. We used to think of waste as something that is inevitable, that everything produces waste. But that word
Yeah.
waste means stuff that is wasted, which is something that should be avoided at all costs.
When you, if you look back in the records, when they first started trying to get rid of their plastic bags, instead of just eradicating them and stop creating them, they just charged people for them, and it made very little difference. And the idea that they didn't just all out stop making them baffles me. Like there was no kind of concrete move to reduction, but now like we wouldn't dream of that anymore.
I think we need to be a little bit kinder to our pre-calamity ancestors, because we have the benefit of having been through this incredibly interesting but somewhat traumatic time. And, we have to be compassionate to them. They haven't necessarily had that nudge in the right direction. So to them, tweaking around the outside and operating within those existing systems seemed like it might work. But we know better.
Are you saying that people can learn?
Well, it's something that we've done occasionally in little bits and bobs. I wouldn't say that it's a universal constant.
So if there's a global crisis of great seriousness, people can learn during the times of crisis.
There is a school of thought that suggests that's sometimes the best time to learn.
Very interesting.
And Sara, you'd have thought that after what we've been through, we might have been put off the idea of space a little bit. But scientists are starting to think about what lies beyond our planet again.
Absolutely.
This time, though, we're coming at it with a bit of a different mindset. What's new?
Yeah. I mean, one of the main things is we have proper policy in place to protect the planet from our launches. We don't allow launches over land and things like that can endanger people. And I think that's really important. But we also look at reusing our systems so much more than we ever did before, which is really important. And there was a little bit of a break when we recovered from the Mars era, but we're starting to look back out into the solar system, and that always drives innovation. The reason we understand our planet so well is all of the satellite technology we developed in the space race. So there's always a merit to going back to space, but I think we have to be careful and ethical and sustainable about it.
Well, hopefully with our newfound empathy for our surroundings, we might be able to apply that when we start feeling comfortable to look beyond our planet again.
I believe in the humans. I believe in us.
I hope to as well. So, as you can see, a lot has happened in the last 50 years. After more than 2 centuries of unbridled industrial growth, all it took is us ruining 2 planets to realize that we can't eat money. Humanity's journey from self-destructive greed to sustainable coexistence wasn't easy. It required all of us to reimagine how we relate to our world, spurred on by watching the super rich devour each other on live television. It's important to remember, though, that this is an ongoing journey, and we all have our parts to play in this global community. Thank you all for tuning into this transmission, and may the planet keep you. Whew, wow, that was quite a show. And I must say, a very handsome host. Good to be back in 2021.
That woman looked just like me. It was really weird.
I still have no idea how they managed to transmit it backwards in time. But now we've got the rest of the show for the viewers at home to get involved in the conversation. So let's get those questions and comments coming in, and we'll get to as many as we can in the time we've got. I've got a couple here already. So I've got a question from Sophie, who's asking. We're talking about reducing the amount of waste we put into the ocean, but also getting plastic waste out of the ocean. How, both in our fictional universe and potentially in our very real one we're in right now, how can we accomplish that? Sara, Ken, Gustavo?
First of all, I think biodegradable plastic, like increasing in use of biodegradable plastic, so it can be degradable before reaching the oceans. So I think this is one point that we can start increasing.
The only way that we're actually going to be able to reduce the amount of ocean plastic is to do the work and actually clean the oceans. And there are tons of amazing organizations across the world that are doing things like that and repurposing that ocean plastic into other things. Like my suit, my dive suit is made from recycled fishing nets and ocean plastic. And then the money that they earn from selling these suits, they put back into organizing cleanups across the world. There are companies that make plant pots out of the recycled plastic. The only way we can do it is to do the work and remove it.
Because there are huge amounts of it floating around. How do we get to it and get it out in the bulk that we need to, Ken?
Well, the stuff floating around shouldn't be that hard. We just need to make some robots like we covered in the thing, and we can have autonomous vehicles traveling around in the ocean, scooping things up. But more difficult is the stuff on the benthic, the stuff that's already on the bottom of the sea, because you might do more damage by removing it than you do by leaving it in place. So we found that in our recent work working on the coral reefs in Malaysia. There's some places where there's lots and lots of plastic intertwined into the corals. Now, should we be removing that? We might cause more damage to the corals by removing it than by leaving it there. So what we really need to do is stop putting it out there ASAP, immediately, because we're not going to be able to remove it, the stuff that's already attached to the seafloor.
And on that note, we do have a suggestion from a viewer, Andrew, who says that maybe we could, standardize things like food containers or other sorts of objects that we use a lot of. Standardize them so that they're not all different sizes and shapes and different lids, so that we can reuse and reuse and reuse them.
Absolutely.
How viable do you think that is?
I think people tend to get a little bit upset with the idea of like personal identity in these things. Like if you standardize things too much, they don't get a say. But I think it's really important to look at like what it gives you, and it potentially gives us like an avenue to a better planet. So like I'm all for this kind of stuff. There's also there are ways you can reduce plastic. Like you could literally start tomorrow. Like there's across the country there are stores without packaging. So you take your own refillable containers in, and you can get rice, pasta, and all sorts of things like that. All those dry ingredients instead of having them packaged in supermarkets. And like the space lady said on the documentary, like the idea of that we have plastic bags and things like that, we can remove that. We can stop using them.
That's something that I've always found confusing. Like we have better, we have backpacks. We have the world is full of those dumb tote bags. It feels like a very small step to just not need carrier bags. It's like absolutely. We have Velcro. Why do we use laces?
I think one of the important things about the kind of legislation that came in that they had to charge for bags was that people actually took a lot more notice that they were using so many of them. I don't know that it massively deterred people because it cost the cost, but it meant people thought about it. And even just that moment of thought, it's well, I can pack my own bag. I think in every handbag I own, every backpack I own, I also have a shopping bag because it's just less hassle to carry one in case I need it. And I think that kind of attitude switch was really, really important for people. And I think that is something that we've gained from legislation like that.
So that, I guess that is something that we kind of talked about in the show. It's that attitude shift. But I
think something that's really important is the impacts of these things, like using plastic, isn't felt by the people that are doing it. So most of the plastic waste, I believe, in the UK gets shipped to other countries to be disposed of. If that was made illegal and we had to have our plastic waste piling up in our back gardens, we'd be impacted by it and more able to make a decision about reducing its use, because so many of the things that we do doesn't impact us, but it impacts people far away. So, why do I care about coral reefs? I don't live near a coral reef.
And right? I think we've been talking about individual changes quite a lot at the moment, but I think, Ken, you're hitting on something that the systems that we live in also facilitate this kind of blindness to problems, because richer, more industrialized nations have for ages been been taking resources from other places and exporting or removing, palming off a big portion of our waste on other communities.
Yeah.
So can we fix this within the system, or do we need to change the system?
Well, we need to change the system because we need to make sure that the impacts of people's decisions are felt by the people making those decisions.
And in fact, we've got a question on exactly that note from one of our viewers, who asks, so there are plenty of individual changes that I can make, but how can we drive big corporations and governments to change as well? Because that isn't always as easy.
Yeah, 100%
See,
agree.
silence, it's difficult.
No, true. We have to push our representatives. So whenever there's something public interest, like whenever there's anything going on, you can email, you can go to officers and things like that, and speak to your local representative and push this narrative that these are things that you care about. The other thing is the way we spend our money is a really important thing to businesses. Collectively, if we use that power, that can help businesses take notice of the things that we care about.
And Ken, you were going to say something.
No, I was just going to say that we could pass laws, right? I mean, there used to be a problem with a hole opening up in the ozone that was caused by chemical reactions in the atmosphere with chlorofluorocarbons, which are things that we used to use in refrigerators and air conditioning systems. When this hole was noticed, they passed international laws to stop processing using those chlorofluorocarbons, and then the hole subsequently closed. So it is possible to pass laws and change things.
So I guess there's a real kind of interplay between people, government, and business, and they all kind of affect each other in very complex ways, and also quite simple ways. Money, votes, in lots of different directions.
There's like the shift of power just isn't quite where it needs to be. The politicians should first and foremost kind of deluge to the people, the voters, the general public. But there's a lot of power held in businesses over the government and lobbying, and it's really hard as an individual to get involved. But there are organizations out there who are already pushing for these things. They're trying to get these laws passed. We have to get them to take notice of us, because it's the people like us that are gonna feel the effects of it more acutely.
And on the subject of governments acting, we've got another question from one of our viewers on YouTube, who is asking a question about our future story, which is, once we had used all of our nuclear weapons to fail to terraform Mars, what stopped us making more?
So in this fictional, or maybe potentially future reality, it's very energy intensive to make these nuclear warheads. And when we reached the point of massive land loss, we didn't have the energy available. So renewable sources are amazing and they're very, very powerful, but they're intermittent. So being able to capitalize on being able to use that power all the time is really difficult and not super conducive to be able to create things like nuclear warheads.
So it wasn't that we got nicer, we just got poorer.
It made it more difficult.
Sure. And I think,
but also maybe humans got better.
I was going to say that does raise a really interesting point, though, because there's whole schools of philosophy that look at what human nature is and what our natural tendencies are. Are they more kind of competitive and egotistical? Are they more collaborative and community based? And I mean, the answer to that is almost definitely more complicated than any of those answers, and I think that's really going to affect how things are going forward.
Yeah.
And we've touched around a lot of this next question, but I think it'd be good to finish with something that our audience can really take away. And it can be scary when you're confronted with a big, complicated issue such as the environment and our relationship with the planet. Do each of you have any takeaway suggestions for how people can make positive changes in their actions or their mindset to help build a better relationship with the world? Let's start with you, Sara.
Yeah, so it can be really, really difficult to look at a problem like this and find your place within it. But there are things that you can do literally starting tomorrow that can help. And I think it's sometimes a flaw of the kind of eco movement that if you're not doing everything perfectly, you're not doing it, like your time's not worth it. And like anything you can do to improve that, I think is really important. So reducing waste, use recyclable, use biodegradable items, or reuse things. Don't use single-use plastics. Use companies that don't use packaging. So I think sprouting up basically all over the place, especially in the UK, are these going back to like milk deliveries, including ones that do things like oat milk, which we now have. So we don't have any packaging for our oat milk, which was one of our main things, which is amazing.
And I guess that those kinds of changes can be kind of scary because it can be hard to know what are those right choices, especially because there's a whole greenwashing thing. A lot of companies will claim that something is biodegradable or eco-friendly,
recyclable,
and actually the truth is not quite as special as they like to make it out. Ken, you've been nodding along. Have you got something to add to that point?
Well, I just think we need to get more information out there about what the contents of food products and the packaging. And even if it's recyclable, doesn't mean it's being recycled, right? So it's midnight here for me. I'm going to take my plastic out, but I'm not sure how much of that's actually going to be recycled into other plastic.
So I guess a big part of that is holding people accountable, and Gustavo, actually, what about you? Kind of building on that idea of kind of changes that people can make, or things that they can make themselves more aware of.
Yeah, I think one way of connecting people to these higher levels are probably promoting some ethical consumption of products. Every choice you make has consequences. And this is especially true when you buy things, because we don't know much about all the chain of events that brings us our cell phones ready to use, not only cell phones, but also groceries and vegetables. So I think if each of us start actively learning a little bit about what are the consequences of each thing that we buy, it doesn't mean that we need to stop buying stuff, because we need this stuff to survive, but at least having this idea of how much labor, how much material, how much water it involves to build all those things that you need, and maybe thinking about how can you cope or trying to counter the impact of your habits.
And I guess a big part of that is remembering that we don't have to be perfectly sustainable in every aspect of our lives. That's kind of within a capitalist system is kind of unrealistic. But if we can make ourselves more aware of some of the consequences and some of the connections between what we do and the effects that they have, that can really make a big difference. Ken, what about you?
Well, I think individual changes is important, but it's not going to scale up to solve the problems that we currently have. We need systemic change. So I think one individual change you could do is get out and communicate, talk to your friends, talk to your family, be annoying to your parents, and get the message across and try to convince other people that we can change this. We can fix our broken planet. It can be done. We just need to get up and do it.
Absolutely. I think there has been like a huge shift in the way people think about things and like ethical consumption and things like that. So like I don't eat meat and dairy, and when I first stopped eating meat and dairy, people found it like really, really crazy. And the shift has been massive. There's so many more people who are interested in looking into why it might be better, what things you could cut out. So like we talked about palm oil quite a lot, and that's something I avoid from my diet because it's bad for the planet and bad for animals, and I have a bleeding heart. And there's like loads of things like that if we push the companies that are creating them, they have no option but to respond to us, because we're the main source of money for them.
And I think that's kind of what a lot of these discussions boil down to is that age-old philosophical saying from the great minds of the Wu-Tang Clan, which is cash rules everything around me, cream, get the money, dollar, dollar bill y'all. And if we're operating within a capitalist system, we've got to live with that reality. And so, as our guests have said, there are things you can change about your own actions and habits. There are things you can make yourself more aware of. And also there's more conversations you can have, whether that's with your friends and family and loved ones, or whether that's, bugging your MP. And also maybe stay away from those cryptocurrencies. They might seem tempting, but it's essentially leaving your car running outside your house, and that makes an invisible coin. So
I think, an amazing point that you've kind of brought up is like how those like, so Bitcoin was developed to be a democratized system, which is great. That's conceptually, that's amazing. But it was just kind of ground up into the gears of everything else. Like one crypto transaction can account for 1 million times as much carbon as a Visa debit transaction. And like, it's crazy they were considering that being the future of our payment systems. And I think because it's kind of glamorized and talked about by a lot of those moguls, like those media moguls and tech moguls, people don't actually know the kind of damaging side of it. And we're a little bit blinded by these people sometimes in that they're very successful and whatever else. And we take what they say on face value. And it's really, really important to look into yourselves. Like, it's environmentally disastrous when you compare it to our current payment system. And I'm totally pro the idea. The the democratized system is amazing, but we have to make sure that people can't exploit it. And it being exploited is what's leading to these crypto mining farms that are taking up the energy of countries. And that's something that we really, really need to address.
And that's really tricky, because there are so many challenges that we face, not just environmentally, but also economically and socially, in terms of massive inequality and stuff like that. Artists being rewarded for their work or not. But so many of the solutions that are being touted aren't actually as great as they initially sound.
A lot of things are like stem the flow rather than like the systemic change. You need to change the flow itself, and it's really difficult to put a pin in one perfect fix. But I mean, the clear thing is we can't do nothing.
And I think those 3 takeaways that we spoke about a few minutes ago, I think, are a great place to wrap up. So, there are individual changes you can make to your behaviors, like what you consume and what you reuse. There are things that you can make yourself more aware of, which are the connections and consequences of what you do. And then there are conversations and actions you can have where you're talking to your friends and family, or badgering politicians, or talking to companies, and you can actually have that kind of interaction. Well, thank you so much. I think that's a good place to wrap up with a takeaway for our guests. Thank you so much, Sara, Gustavo, and Ken. It's been fascinating and fun, and we traveled 50 years into the future and back. So how often do you get to do that? Thank you.
You're welcome.
And a massive thank you to you at home for joining us as well. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Once again, big thanks to our guests and any of our viewers who've donated as well. If you do enjoy the show, please consider making a donation. It's much appreciated, and it helps us keep bringing you content like this. We've got more Lates Online shows coming up on the last Thursday of every month. Keep an eye on our website and social channels for more info. Next month, Christina will be playing host to 3 scientists who'll be fighting over a mystery specimen. In the meantime, there's a ton of other talks, shows, and videos on our YouTube channel. And you can stay up to date with what's going on at the museum on our Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook pages, as well as our website at nhm.ac.uk. Until then, that was Hindsight 2021. I'm Khalil Thirlaway, and this has been Lates Online from the Natural History Museum. Goodbye.